I'm going to present some of the work I have done during these last years on the geography of scientific research and knowledge networks. My presentation will be in 3 parts, and I plan to spend the half of the presentation on the 2 first parts and the second half on the third part. So I want first to discuss the growth of science, which is an old expression in science studies, but from a geographical perspective. Then I want to discuss the relation between science and cities, and especially the idea of a city size effect on scientific productivity. And finally, I want to take another perspective on the geography of science, and instead of focusing on the geography of science from the point of view of affiliation, so let's say on an institutional geography of science, I will propose another approach, which will be to be interested in research places, but research places as the place where scientists goes to, the place they are working on, and the place they visit, for instance, for conferences, as you mentioned, the Science and Technology and Indicator conference, for instance. So other type of places that matter in research. And my case study will be on Svalbard, which is an interesting territory at the north of Norway, where a lot of scientists from all around the world go to do science. So what I'm going to talk about is taken from different pieces of work that I have done so far. So recently I have published a chapter in the handbook Bibliometrics, directed by Raphael Boll, on the regional distribution of research and the question of polarization. So here I'm not going to talk about polarization, but concentration, spatial concentration, but for me it's basically the same. Then another aspect of my talk today will be about the size of cities, the effect of city size, as I said. And this work I have published it in French so far. For it's going to be published in French, because in France we still publish part of our work in our mother language, but it will be translated. And also another part of this work is also published in an article in English, so I will give you the link as well. And finally, the work on Svalbard. It's a work under progress with Mylene Strook, and so it's not published. A part of it is published in our master thesis that I have supervised. So the growth of science, it's an interesting expression, because when you hear it, you don't really think about geography. Actually, it's used in Derek Desola-Price work, seminal work, and it's used to designate everything which is growing in science, I believe, but especially the exponential growth of published papers, which, according to Derek Desola-Price, is a reason to measure research and to develop scientometrics as a discipline. But it's also reused by Joseph Ben David, who, according to me, is one of the pioneers of what I call geography of science. And he reuses this expression when he studies the development of national systems of research. And myself, I tend to understand it and take this expression as the expression of a geographical expansion of the world system of science, meaning a growing number of places involved in the system and having connection with each other. And actually, it's really not a new phenomenon, and it's a known process. I mean, for a long time, people interested in scientometrics indicator at the country level, they notice this effect of expansion. And for instance, here you have a screenshot, sorry, from report from the Agency of Japan at the beginning of the 90s. And here you have the share in published papers of the major publishing countries from 73 to 86. And so you can just look more precisely on the diminishing share of the US from 38% at the beginning to 35% at the end of the period. And at the same time, you can look at the growing share of the category others, which suggests that there is a growing number of places involved in the world system, as we can measure it, of course, with all the biases of the bibliographic database that we have, of course. And so with my colleague in Toulouse, I have done my PhD with, we have been looking at this deconcentration process. And so here you can look, it's the same data, but from 87 to 2007. So you can see that here from 34% for the US, the share of the world production of the US is still diminishing, and it loses 10 points during the period under study here. And at the same time, you have, of course, one of the major phenomena that we have not witnesses during from the beginning of the 21st century. It's the growth of China in the system. And so with my colleague, we have also analyzed this deconcentration process at the level of cities. Also, we were not the first to notice this evolution. For instance, there is a seminal paper from Hinaber in 1977 called The Changes in the Centralization of Science, published in Research Policy, where it was already analyzing this deconcentration effect at the city level. And so what we did was just a continuation of this analysis of this phenomenon of that we call the deconcentration, spatial deconcentration, which is related to the development of science as an activity and also of higher education in universities developing as at the same time as the population of students developed. So it's a whole process that we can analyze. But curiously enough, this deconcentration process is not something that is so shared as I mean, not everyone in the academic sphere seems to agree with this process. And for instance, a very famous researcher in the US used to insist on the very important concentration of research activity. And so, for instance, in this paper, he was insisting on the fact that only a few spots are creative and are involved here in the scientific citations, so in the getting citations. And so, and he was also arguing in this paper that this process of concentration was tend to develop even more. And so there are, according to him, a growing inequalities in terms of scientific visibility and production. But on this map, as you can see, there is no dynamics. It's only one year, which is represented here. And so this idea of concentration is related to the idea also of the fact that the hypothesis that there is a city size effect, and that the productivity of scientists is higher in metropolitan areas, so in big cities. One way to promote this hypothesis is to look at the relation between the number of publications of a city and the urban population of this city. And when you do this, you get this type of scaling relation. And so if you measure the slope and you notice that the slope is higher than 1, then you would argue that there is that the distribution is superlinear, which means that it suggests that the activity is more important than you could expect given the size of the city, which suggests a higher productivity of per capita in biggest cities. In this paper, the authors also did this for patents and employment, and you see there is not this scaling effect for the total employment, which gives another argument for them of this specificity of scientific and innovation activities. But we have discussed this with my colleague again in Toulouse, and also Guillaume Cabanec, who is online. And so I'm going to explain why we don't really agree with this idea. First, the paper I have presented before, they used the same data as this paper. So they reused the data from this paper, from Nomaler and colleagues. And in this paper, the authors also noticed this superlinear distribution, but they are also very qualifying the observation, saying that the fit is not very good. There is a lot of dots that are not on the sorry, I don't find my word, but you see what I mean, on the line, regression line. But, and also, curiously enough, the biggest cities, they are under the regression line, which would suggest that they are underperforming somehow. So at the end of this paper, they are not completely positive about what we could really say from this type of plot. And what we have analyzed for the case of the UK and France is that actually when you analyze the relationship between the number of academic publications per city, the relation with the urban population, you have this slope superior to 1. But when you focus on the relation between the number of publications with the number of academic staff in the city, you completely lose this superlinear relationship, and you have a slope which equals 1, which means that it's somehow much more linear. We have noticed this as well for France, and this paper is in English, so you can access it. And so we discussed this idea of higher productivity of researcher in bigger cities, since actually the researcher publish as much as they are present in the city. So when you take into account, instead of the urban population, the effective number of academic researchers present in the city, then you lose this effect. So it means that it's just structural effect. The structural effect which just reflects the fact that there is more researcher in bigger cities than in smaller cities. So here it's just the same figure that before for France, because it was a bit like, so it's just if you are interested in more detail. But well, I have to go on. So what we can conclude from this is that what some politicians in research policy call the critical mass effect is somehow not really present in when you look empirically at the data. And what we have found is actually in line with some reports of University Alliance. And so the first time we have published something about this idea was in this handbook. And then more recently, as I have presented, we have done more detailed work on the case of France, which is already published, and on the case of UK, which will be published. To do this, I'm using the agglomeration perimeters that we have created during our work at the world level that I have shown you before. And all these parameters, they are shared in a data paper. To put a bit this observation in discussion, I will say that actually there is a lot of literature on these scaling laws, not only in research and innovation, but in many other areas of activities, of human activities. And geographers tend to insist on the importance of urban perimeters because they can, this type of method, the scaling law approach, is very sensitive to the type of perimeter that you use. Also, other authors say that you have to be careful with the regression method that you are using, that this type of method often don't take into account places with no observation, which somehow may create sensitivity also. You also have to be very careful about the quality of the fit, let's say, to be quick. And then there is also an important aspect, which is the fact that the city size is clearly not the only determinant when the spatial logics of research places, the spatial logics underneath the geography of research institution. And so if you want to really understand the geography of research institution, you have to look at the specificity of each institutions, because it's not the same thing to decide where you are going to install an university or where you are going to install a marine station. And universities throughout centuries also have changed their logics of spatialization. And in more recent years, in the 20th century, for instance, universities has developed also in middle-sized cities, and it was for urban planning strategies. And so you can then, if you take into account this complexity and this historical evolution and the co-evolution between urban population and the scientific activities, you will get a better picture to understand how research is organized. Finally, in terms of methodology, there are different ways of measuring spatial concentration and its evolution, and there are other methods than, for instance, the Gini or the scaling law, which could be used. For instance, some colleague of mine, Louay and Barthélémy, have developed a method which is designed to take into account the geographical location, really, of the places where you have observations. So you could, with this method, really take into account the concentration in terms of in the geographical space, meaning that you could also take into account the kilometric distance, for instance, between the different places that you analyze in your distribution. I will answer every question if I'm not clear. I'm so sorry if it's the case. Finally, dynamics matter. And so here you can see that we have done a bit the same as Florida did before with my colleague Laurent Gégou and Guillaume Cabanac, looking at the distribution of highly cited papers, but not only the distribution, which will confirm this idea of course, scientific activity is very much concentrated in a few areas, but actually at the dynamics, here the dynamics is taken into account as the color of the bar depend on the evolution growth. And so you can see that it's more like peripheral areas, which have which are growing faster in terms of attracting citations, let's say. So this work has policy implications in the sense that this idea that bigger cities have better productivity and that there is like a reinforcement effect between productivity and the share of highly educated people in cities. This idea is very, very firmly and present in many reports and policies, influencing many policies. And so we consider that demonstrating the lack of critical mass effect can have important consequences because it invalidates the benefit of concentration of research funds and excellence policies targeting the biggest cities. Well, I hope I have still enough time to do the second part. And so my second part, as I said before, is about another perspective on the geography of science. So I want to attract your attention on another way of thinking about the geography of science. So not only the institutional geography of science, the one that you can measure using the affiliations of researchers, but the one that you can look at when you are interested in the places where scientists really go, or also the places which are studied by scientists, for instance. And so here I focus on the Arctic region, an inhabited region, but not very visible when you consider the world scientific activity. And more especially, I focus on Svalbard, which is a very nice archipelago at the north of Norway, where, as you can see here, there are like researchers going for their research projects. So here it's taken from a database called Research in Svalbard, which is indexing all the projects, the research projects that are performed there. Like, so when a researcher wants to go to Svalbard to do research, he's supposed to register his project in this database. And here you can see that there are like some type of centralities in this very peripheral area. And so some places gather a growing number of projects, of research fieldworks. It's the case of Ny-Ålesund. And so what I want to explain you about Svalbard is that it is the Arctic territory which concentrates the most important number of scientific stations. So here on this graph, all the blue dots are the Arctic places where there are stations, scientific stations. And the red dots are the countries having scientific stations on this territory. For instance, here, Denmark has an Arctic stations in the Faroe Islands and in Greenland. But Denmark has no scientific stations on Svalbard, but in Svalbard, there are like many countries with scientific stations, having installed a scientific station. And for instance, most of them are in the same village called Ny-Ålesund, which explains the centrality that you have noticed before. And so in Ny-Ålesund, you have like little houses like this, and they belong to different countries. And when we plot the distribution of bilateral projects, so research projects that have been that are shared by several institutions from several countries, you get this network where you can notice that some countries are very central and other countries are much more peripheral. And the central countries, which is not very surprising, well, the first one is Norway, which is as Svalbard is under the sovereignty of Norway, this is not very surprising. And then countries having stations in Svalbard. And so what I have done here is that I was interested to look at this as this core-periphery structure, and I wanted to identify taking into account the dynamics, to identify which countries were part of the core and which countries were part of the periphery. And to do this, I have done classical network analysis research on center core and periphery. When you look at core and periphery in a network, in network analysis, you will try to identify a group of countries which are very connected to each other. It will be the core, and a group of countries where there is no connection within. I mean, they are not connected to each other, but they all are connected to the same other countries which are the core countries. And so structurally, when you plot the network as an adjacency matrices, as I have done here, you will have, if you have a structure of this type, a core-periphery structure, you will have a black block, which is the block where of the core, where all the ties are present, and a white block, it's the one of the periphery, meaning that the ties, the countries belonging to the periphery do not have ties to each other. And so there are many methods to find, to be able to identify and to order the matrix in order to find the different the members of the core and the periphery. And so what I was interested in also was to take into account what we could call the semi-periphery, which is countries that are in between. And so to do this, I have used a new R package called Grid and a method called the stochastic block modeling. And so I'm not going to enter into detail, but it helps me to identify the evolution of the structure at 2 points in time, so before and after 2005. So here I can see that Norway, Germany, and the UK were in the core before and are still in the core, but you have new countries in the core that were in the semi-periphery and entered the core. And for instance, you have now China, which has developed its activity, its Arctic activities. And so it was in the periphery before 2005. Now it's in the semi-core. And also Spain is a country who was in the periphery before 2005 and now is in the core. So this is what I'm interested in. And to finish, of course, you would like to qualify the result, taking into account the fact that the research in Svalbard database has some bias, as every database is. So what we have done with Mylene Strook is that, and she has compared the number of projects recorded on research in Svalbard with the relative distribution of researchers per day in Svalbard, which come from another source. And here you can see that it underrepresents the case of Poland and Russia. And the reason is that Poland and Russia have stations in other parts of Svalbard, and they don't really need to use the research in Svalbard database to do research there and to say that they're going to do research. So now I'm going to conclude in two parts, with two main points. The first point is the fact that when we are looking at fieldworks or when we are looking at conferences as research places, so this other approach of geography of science that I am advocating, we immediately can think of the fact that this type of practices in science are currently challenged by the fact that mobility is an issue now in research, as we want to reduce our carbon impact. And also with the pandemics, there has been less travels and so on. So there is still a way to do research on different places, but sometimes you can do research on remote places, but using data, for instance, satellite data and so on. So this is something which is developing a lot. And also online symposium and conferences are developing a lot, as we can notice today. And so, but this type of event or this type of practices that are developing, they don't abolish the importance of geography. So I want to say that even if we don't move, we still are very influenced by the space we are living in and the country where our career and our trajectories are embedded in, the networks and the collectives we are belonging to. And so all these different aspects of our lives are influenced by space and geography a lot. And also the development of scientific movements, they are also interestingly related to spatial movements. So if you think, for instance, of a specific specialty, scientific specialty, it can have moments where it is clustered in a few areas, moments where the specialty is more spread in the world. So many places are contributing to a new research field. And this type of movement and what E10 Marion called choreographies can be analyzed in the framework of geography of science. So I think I've finished. If you are interested in more in the geography of the scientific production at the world level, we have this website, which is both in French and in English, so you can change the language. Here you have a flag to do this, and you will access a different the number of presentations that we are giving, like an interactive map to look at the distribution of scientific publication at the world level and so on. And also, if you are interested in mapping science with files from the Web of Science or Scopus, we are developing a tool with Guillaume Cadarac, also with online, which can help you to do this. So it's a web tool and it's available on the beta version. So with this tool, for instance, you can do this type of flow map. Here it's the map of joint research in Svalbard projects between participant countries.